And so I had a glass jar and some Post-its, and people can just write and put the Post-it note in there with the prompt, what did you wish you heard growing up?
Today on Time We Discuss, I have Samantha Mineroff, and it's time we discuss what it's like to be a poet and writer. Samantha, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you're a poet. I believe you have a couple of published books of poetry. Is that correct?
Yes, I have two. They both
Oh,
came out this year.
that is fantastic. And you're also a writer as part of your full-time job, which is fantastic. So let's start with you as poetry, or you as a poet, I should say.
Yeah.
When you are starting to get into the zone and write poetry, how do you go about doing that? What gets you in the zone? Where do you get your creativity? All that good stuff.
I think I save my time for sitting down and writing after I've had some time to mull ideas over. So I'm always thinking about something as I'm going for a walk, or if something inspires me, a song. And I just keep a running list of notes in my phone, or I write it down in a journal. I have like 10, 20 different journals. They all are in different states of notes and writing, but I'm always thinking about those things. And then I write them down, and it's a lot less overwhelming than trying to think, okay, what is this project about? And then I look back at those notes and I look for a recurring theme or something that I want to elaborate more on or that I'm excited about more.
You talked about writing on your phone, which I think is really cool. When I was interviewing Kristen Williams back in early 2024, she is a self-published author. She wrote, I believe it's called The Inept Mother. It's a kind of like a parent's guide almost. She talked about when she first started writing it, she was actually writing on her phone, which I thought was really, really cool. So my question for you, when you're doing this on your phone, what app are you using to really gather your thoughts? Do you really find a particular tool is most beneficial? What is working best for you?
I'm very messy. I just use the Notes app and I have a running list of bullets, and it's not organized at all. So I just kind of it's sort of like a immediate response of like I have to write something down right away, and I don't have pen and paper. That's where I'll put it.
I'm kind of the same way. If I have something like that, I end up texting it to myself, which is kind of silly, but that's kind of my way of remembering it, and then I go and check it later. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the books that you released. So whenever I speak to my authors, I like to get an idea of, did you approach a publisher? Did a publisher approach you? Did you go down the self-publish route? What did the publishing component look like for you as a poet?
As a poet, I decided to self-publish. I was never very interested in publishing my poetry traditionally or in a literary magazine. I was more so wanting to do that with my fiction. And I had come very close a few times with my novel, but I had gotten so used to the rejections and revising and editing that I lost the love and passion for writing. So I turned to poetry, and it took the pressure off knowing that I wasn't going to try and pursue this with a publisher. It was just for me and sort of a passion project.
Let's talk about your experience promoting yourself, because I remember speaking with a couple people, and they talked about, when you publish your own stuff, then it's kind of on you to then promote your own stuff. So what was that experience like for you?
Some of it was very organic. So, for one of my books, it was a collaborative project. I did all the writing, but I did work with a bunch of people to create it and to get ideas with it. And that sort of organically spread the word a little bit because I think people like to share what like projects like that they're a part of. And then I try and find, I think it's specific to a person's genre and their specific skill set and what they want to write about. For me personally, my writing is very mental health focused. And so I reach out to audiences that are specialized in that area to see if we can have a back and forth, if we can chat about it, and collect thoughts and share them that way.
That's really interesting. So what has that, and I'm assuming it has been, but how well has that been received, like reaching out to a professional and trying to get them to, I'm going to say collaborate for lack of better words. What was that like?
I had no idea what I was going into, but I found that like-minded people who are trying to also help others and have sort of a similar goal into helping people, it's very easy and feels familiar and feels very balanced. And so we have a similar goal in mind, which I think gives me like a really good way to pinpoint how I want to talk about the work without it being super promoting because we're working together. And so it's been received really, really well. I've had a few people that I've, networked with online or just in past experiences that I've interviewed with. And having just that connection in general, that love and share for mental health, I think is a really helpful way to create a foundation. And they've been super great and super helpful, especially if they have their own mental health resources or writing that they're also trying to promote. So we try and work together to find some common themes that we're going to speak to.
Let's hang on education for a second. So, how has your formal education helped, hindered, or had no effect on you specifically as a poet?
I think it has done a little bit of both. So it's helped in a sense that it gave me some structure and some ways to think about poetry in a way that I can appreciate it more and thinking about how the writing sounds and paying very, very close attention, picking and choosing the exact words you want to use. I learned how to cut as much as possible and really strip things down to their core. At the same time, I think when you're a young writer, especially in college or high school, you're easily influenced. And I think I took feedback to an extreme sometimes where I was only writing in the way that I thought I should be. And so trying to find your voice can be tough when you're getting constant feedback. And you have to learn, I eventually learned later on in my life that you don't need to take everyone's feedback and it doesn't mean it's always right. So that was sort of a process I had to learn as I was going through writing poetry, particularly.
So let's hang on the voice for a second. How did you go about finding your voice, or what would you recommend people do to try to find their voice?
Trying not to self-edit and filter everything you write and say. And you can do that by journaling every day and just thinking about the world that you live in, the way you describe your environment, your relationships, um, the most basic things can go a long way to help identify what your voice looks like. And you can also find prompts online if that's helpful to kind of get yourself thinking. You want to try and think about, you know, aspects that could maybe elicit some emotion like tension or conflict. That can help sort of fine tune and find your voice because the way you interpret that can really show and reflect, who you are as a writer.
Perfect. Okay. So when it came time to actually get your poetry published, what was that process like for you? How difficult was that for you to actually get started and go from, the very beginning to actually finished product?
Didn't know anything about it, so I had a friend who gave me his basic rundown of his experience of what he did, so recommendations he had for who to reach out to. And so he gave me a resource of a vendor that I ended up going with. And what they do is you can pick and choose what kind of services you're looking for. Personally, I knew I wasn't going to be good at designing and laying everything out. So I needed someone to take my writing and make it look good and the appropriate layout for publishing. And so I hired a vendor to help me out with that. It was a lot of reviewing documents over and over and over again, looking at proofs, looking at and communicating with editors who are also trying to help you and find ways to improve the writing without, changing it too much. So a lot of it was just constant reviewing, rereading, also getting, some readers, friends of mine, to review it as well ahead of time so I can make sure I'm not missing something or that it was engaging enough. So really using that feedback to help me with fine tuning the layout and the placement of each of the poems.
That'll make sense. Samantha, one question I'd like to ask people when they're in a creative field, and this might apply to you and it might not. But at what point, when people say, Samantha, what do? You come back with the answer, I'm a poet. At what point do you start to identify as being a poet? Do that at all, or is it still like I'm a writer? This is something I enjoy, not as like a hobby, but maybe as a hobby, something like that. What's that like for you?
I think I identify myself more as a writer because poetry isn't the only type of writing I do. And I think the only reason why I wouldn't say poet is because I don't want to pigeonhole myself into one type of writing. But I think it is something that I love and have was always kind of brushed aside. So it feels a little strange saying I'm a poet because I was always writing fiction, but this turned out to be, really the kind of work that I wanted to focus on. And a lot of the feedback I would get on my fiction and other types of writing was always that, it's too abstract, too poetic. And so, kind of like using that feedback as a strength rather than a weakness in my writing has been really interesting. So
Smith, I love what you said, how you took that feedback and what would have been as a almost negative, and you actually turned that into a strength. I think that is really, really cool. Because I think for some people, and I'm this way, I'm very protective of my creative content. It's always like they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand it. I always that's always my first approach. And for you to say, they're pointing out a weakness, and instead I'm going to turn this into a strength. That is just really, really cool. I think that's awesome advice for anyone in any kind of creative field. I absolutely love that. So for someone that wants to they want to be a poet, this is their calling. This is something they really feel strongly about. What kinds of opportunities are out there? I mean, obviously you can write, that's the crux of it. You write, you get it published perhaps, maybe you teach. What other opportunities are out there for someone that they really just want to write poetry?
there's a really great online community for poets. There's a couple of Instagram pages, social media pages. You, of course, have to be careful. Not everyone on there is, a true poet in the sense that they are, writing poetry, not just like content that they're trying to sell and get, likes and things like that. So just depends on what you're looking for. But there are some online communities that are great that will host like open mic nights on a live stream, which I think is an awesome way to create community and connection. So I would just do some research on ways that you can get your poetry out there in a low commitment setting, because then you can practice sharing your work and get your work out there, but it's not necessarily high stakes. You can, of course, submit your work to literary magazines, book fairs, book festivals. If you have a book already, you can work with your local bookstores to come up with events. That's what I try and do is, work within a community close to me. So a lot of different avenues to share.
It actually kind of reminds me of Meredith Dietz. She was a comedian in New York, and I had the great opportunity to interview her. And she kind of talked about the idea of open mic night in the most literal sense, going out there to open mics, like you would expect a comedian to do, and testing out your material and see what works, what doesn't work. That almost reminds me of what you're talking about. You take your poetry in these virtual platforms, and you can give it a try and see what the response is like, and maybe get some constructive feedback as well. That is really, really awesome. Samantha, I am running a little short on time, but one thing I like to do whenever I'm speaking with my guests is give them the opportunity to talk about a project they're working on, a cause they believe in. If you want to talk about your poetry, your books, any kind of cause, I'd like to open the floor up to you. The floor is yours.
The book that I want to plug for you guys is called Dear Daughter. I don't know if you can see it through the screen, but this is a collection of poetry that really speaks to my mental health advocacy. So I worked with a licensed therapist and a women's therapy group to collect themes of things like generational trauma issues that women are facing, but also just anyone. It's called Dear Daughter, but it could be applied to any situation that you're in. It's really a reparenting tool. So getting words that you never heard growing up, things like apologies that you never got that would have healed certain wounds, or words of encouragement that maybe you didn't get because you're grieving a parent of some sort. And so this has been my passion project, the one that I've been really focused on, and I've been collecting anonymous messages from folks if they feel like reaching out to me about what kinds of things that they wish they heard growing up, and that feedback I use to collaborate with therapists to then do like an Instagram live or some sort of content around that so that they have some resources.
That is really, really cool. I'm kind of speechless on that. The idea of taking those anonymous submissions and then you actually doing something with that. That is just, it's mind blowing. I'm curious, how did you come up with that idea?
My first author event for this, I thought, what's a way to get some people to engage with the work and not just walk by. And so I had a glass jar and some Post-its on the front, and people can just write and put the Post-it note in there with the prompt, what did you wish you heard growing up?
So I'm curious, if you could pick one or two, what are some themes that you encountered?
Oof, grief in general, whether it's you lost a parent or you're estranged from them, and what that looks and feels like, and how to process that and how it can come up in even positive moments, and how to work through that. Um, I've also come across it seems that there's this pressure to be perfect, whether it's, body image or achievement or whatever it is that you're trying to, um, either make up for something or impress your parent, it's like a conditional love. And so kind of releasing that pressure off and accepting, the whole self, good and bad. And then finally, I think forgiveness in the sense of, you might not have the opportunity to heal wounds with your parent, but you can heal them yourself with self-love and kindness and compassion. Just because you don't get that from your parent doesn't mean you don't deserve it and that you can't do it for yourself. So those are the three really big aspects. The book is split up into apologies, warmth, and encouragement. So the reader can kind of pick what they need whenever they're feeling that they need some sort of reassurance in that way.
That is really, really amazing. Okay, cool. I believe I was speaking with hypnotist Chris Swift. I interviewed him way at the beginning of my show. And if he's the right person I'm thinking of, one thing he said was, there's only one you, so be kind to yourself. So this idea of like people thinking they have to be perfect, it's like just take a step back, be kind to yourself. There's only one you. So I hope that was him. If not, he gets a free plug out of this. Samantha, I'll make sure I get all of those links from you. I'll put them on the website, in the show notes. They'll be all over the place. So when people are trying to find you, they can easily do that. Thank you so much again for being on Time We Discuss, and we learn what it's like to be a poet.
Thank you so much. This has been so great chatting with you. I appreciate it.